Morning, everybody. Hi. Welcome to this morning's deep dive into SEO, the first in our series of tourism and tech deep dive events. It's really lovely to see you all this morning. Even if I can't see you, please do introduce yourself in the chat and make yourself known. So I'm Tim Robinson from Tech East.
I'm Chris Green. I'm Head of Marketing and Innovation at Footprint Digital.
Yeah, and I'm Paul Edwards, and I'm Head of Digital at This Away.
Paul, how about yourself? What's your sort of nutshell view of what we say, what SEO is?
I think fundamentally what's changed over the last, 5 years in particular, when I think about SEO, I try not to think too much about chasing algorithms or beating algorithms or anything like that. And I think a lot of people, when they think about SEO, it's like this dark art that only geeks know about and know how to optimize for. Ultimately, for me, SEO is about creating great experiences for your users and your customers, and Google is rewarding that more and more. Yes, as we'll go into, there's definitely different pieces around SEO that make up what you optimize and how you do that. But really, plain and simple, that for me is keep optimizing for users and putting users first. I think is a really important takeaway from this.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, I think the issue, or not the issue, I think the question of SEO is it's been many things over the last 15, 20 years as the nature of the internet and search engines have changed. But I think the fundamental element that has stayed true is it is the practice of getting your website, your business, your profile to the top of whichever search engine it is we're talking about, so you can benefit from the traffic from there. So whether that is Google, whether it is YouTube, whether it is Bing or Yandex or Baidu or DuckDuckGo or the myriad other search engines that have come and gone over the years. I think the one thing that if there is a degree of question about what does it really involve, well, we just need to ensure that we're doing whatever we can to rank highly. And that changes greatly over time. And as Paul said, that's some vast differences there. So we've got I can see the first poll is running. So as soon as that has finished, what we'll then do, we'll roll into my presentation and then we will keep things moving. I can see that we are almost all the way through there. And just this question is, does your company have a website? Which is a good place to start. Incidentally, it is possible to optimize for businesses that do not have websites. And actually, it's never been easier. If you are one of these people and you want to get involved in that more quickly, Google My Business and My Site for Google, I think that's what it's called now, Paul. But yeah, they are your entry barriers to entry there. So as that is rolling, let me see if we can kind of tee up the screen share so we can get rolling into mine. Perfect. And of course, I have got my screen is covered in other screens, which is always fun. Perfect. So you should shortly all be able to see my slideshow when it is loaded. It's always that slightly on this moment. Fantastic. So let's start things off. So a bit more of a formal introduction, I guess. My name is Chris Green. I'm Head of Marketing Innovation at Footprint Digital. I've been working in the search industry in various forms for well over 10 years now, mainly search engine optimization, but paid search, web analytics, email, general digital marketing, and running teams that do all of the above. So I've done this for a little while and I've seen quite a lot. Today, what I'm going to kind of look to cover is the more technical aspects of SEO, but fundamentally, this is a kind of an introductory session to it. So I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty. We have some further reading and additional resources and an SEO checklist that can help you kind of work on this, but we want to cover these 5 points. So what Google really wants from your website, what Google really needs as a whole. And I'll tell you why Google's there predominantly. Key technical aspects needed for a website to rank well, some important SEO pitfalls to avoid, how not considering mobile first could be harming your rankings, and then finally we'll end off on some free tools so you can understand this and start getting close to this data yourself, which is all important. So just in a nutshell, when we talk about SEO, there's various models and ways of visualizing it, but we kind of structure it as a period and say there are core principles. And these can be broadly grouped, but we're saying there's 4, starting from the research, the planning, understanding the market, through to your website, the technical and infrastructural side, the content that you as a brand or an entity produce, and then the authority or your ability to demonstrate authority. And there's various elements to that. As you can see on the right, we've got difficulty going upwards. The further you move up this pyramid, typically speaking, the harder it is to achieve, but also the greater the rewards for doing so. But as with any pyramid or structure of this kind, if you ignore the foundations or the pillars at the bottom, you'll struggle the higher up you go. Now, I'll be talking about this tier, the website, the technical, and then Paul will be going on to talk about content once I'm done. So let's start things off. Nice large pink slide there to wake everyone up. What does Google really want from your website? First things first, let's just consider what the internet, what the web would be like without search engines as a whole. I found a 2003 good website guide, which is effectively Google in paper format, and it's horrible. You know, the finding the website you want within a book, you know, typing in the web address and navigating directly to that. It almost seems unheard of. And there are many people who actually are not aware of the internet sort of pre-useful search engines, but search engines make up the backbone for what it is we do. Now, quite a lot, you know, SEOs have a tendency of saying, well, SEO is Google and vice versa. And sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. However, within the UK, 92% of search is Google. So actually, when we talk about SEO, unless we're talking about very specific examples in certain areas, we're talking about how do we please Google. So to really get on top of that, we need to understand, well, what is the best way to do that? Now, just to give you a few ideas of scale and the size, Google handles at least 1.5 trillion searches per year, could be up to 2 trillion. And I know 0.5 of a trillion, half a trillion is a large margin of error there, but this number is so large that most people would probably struggle to really imagine the size and the scale. This is just how in demand these services are and how frequently they are used. And Google is growing up fast, and its complexity and sophistication is developing at a speed unlike anything we could have predicted. What it took in 1999 to crawl and build its index of 50 million pages took about a month. And that's exceptional, because 50 million is a large number. Back in 2012, however, the same was accomplished in less than a minute. And today, that's even faster. So the speed of comprehension of effectively hoovering up the internet and being able to return it as search results is only but growing. And it's becoming more and more fundamental part of everyone's lives, whether you know it or not. Now, the mission of Google, this is Larry Page, the CEO, the perfect search engine understands exactly what you mean and gives you back exactly what you want. And just there's something to really kind of stick on a moment there, and the difference between when we search for things, what we're actually looking for and what we actually search for aren't often the same, because we're often very poor. We as everyone are poor at expressing ourselves. Google recognizes this very, very keenly, and it's seeking out to, you know, pair people with the right information, even if they can't express themselves properly. Now, this is almost what I say exactly sets Google apart from the other search engines, specifically in the early days, is they were able to do this far, far better. But let's be real. What does Google really want? It wants shed loads of cash. I mean, effectively, it is a profit-making company. When it made the move to split itself off to Alphabet as the parent company, and you know, they've got shareholder demands and, you know, this constant pressure to continuing to grow. So let's not kid ourselves. There is an objective around search to be better, but fundamentally, this has to generate money. How does Google make money? Google makes money in many, many ways, and it's continuing to diversify this all the time. Fundamentally, the answer is paid advertising. Paid advertising makes up for about 86% of revenue that Google makes. It tends to vary, but it's a huge, huge part of its business. And why is that important? Well, we think about this. We think about, well, Google wants to make better search. It needs to make money from revenue via advertising. Well, actually, then what it really needs is us, you, the user, all of us. But more importantly, it needs us to come back. And this ecosystem, or this continuum that Google's generated, has to be protected at all costs. If the users are not happy with what they receive in search results, they will stop searching and go elsewhere. And when that starts to happen, advertisers spend less and Google makes less. So whilst a number of the decisions that Google makes are quite often, you know, very hotly contested or argued about, fundamentally, if it's increasing the amount of users that are on Google's platform, or Google are seeing it increases their levels of satisfaction, they'll keep on doing it because it makes advertisers happy. So what we can really learn about this is, you know, Google wants to keep the users happy with good search results, with a good search experience, and they don't always get it right. But if we as website owners, business owners, people that manage this kind of thing, if we're able to show Google that we can make users happy in the various ways that that is done, we get benefited from that in the long term. So just an exercise for later, when we run these workshops, I tend to do it actually in the room, but we're not going to have time now, is if you were Google, how would you choose which pages to show the highest in search results? And you don't have to be a search engineer or an information retrieval expert or an SEO to be able to answer this. Really is kind of work out, well, what ways as a user do you recognize a good website being? Sit down and build this list, over a coffee. It doesn't have to be substantial, but even if you can come up with 10, 20 different items, areas that you might judge on, there's a strong chance that Google is doing a large proportion of those or trying to do a lot of those. And if you can identify that, you can then work from there, say, well, this is what our website also needs to do. Now, incidentally, if anyone wants to research this a little further, you can Google Search Quality Rater Guidelines. Google have a manual team that assess how good search results are, and they have a manual or a guidebook for that. That guidebook is not exactly the ranking algorithms that Google uses, but it's pretty darn close, or it's what they're aiming for. So that's a really deep piece of research for those who really want to deep dive into it, but rely on that information if you want to get a bit further ahead. But the key action from this section is we have to demonstrate the value we provide to users in a way that Google can recognize. And actually, SEO fundamentally is around that. It's not just Google, it is other search engines, but how can we make the value of the businesses and the websites obvious or clear to users in a way search engines can recognize? Cool. So some of the key technical aspects to rank well, and again, I'm not going to sort of thrash you all with intense amounts of technical detail here because the research can be done later. This is more to give you an idea of what it is you need to be worrying about and thinking about. But firstly, let's stop for a second and think, well, actually, how do search engines work? Where does Google get all this data? How does it kind of process it? Well, in a real nutshell, it starts with spiders. Not actual spiders. Spiders are just what Google refers to code that crawls or works its way through website content. The Google spiders are set out to discover links, to discover new content, to discover new websites, to see how far they can go, how everything relates to each other. Now, that is the fundamental largest kind of part way of Google discovering it. But from this, Google then looks at all of this information and data that it gathers, and it puts all of that into what they call indexes, which have hundreds of billions of web pages. Just think of these like massive libraries. And effectively, it needs to hold all this information like that. So when a user goes and runs a searches for any query, Google can look at its indexes, right, what out of what I know would best fit this? And then it returns and it ranks that information according to what's appropriate. And it does this at an astronomically quick scale. But the spider is important. We have to ensure that the websites are robust and we can help Google spiders find their way around the websites as easily as possible. And there's many different ways to do that. And technical SEO is pretty much kind of obsessed with these kind of elements. But fundamentally, the website is built on links, effectively hyperlinks, links between web pages, whether they're within your website or other websites. Without these links connecting pages, Google and other search engines, and to an extent users, cannot continue in exploring and find new pages. Now, if we're talking about this from a Google perspective, if your key really important web pages on your website don't have links to them, or the links are hard to find, those pages will not get the value they need. And this also counts as if these links are too far from the home page. So part of one of the tasks, one of the things we really need to be concerned about is how can we ensure that Google can find and prioritize the pages correctly, because we don't want to lose value there. So, but beyond the discovery, beyond finding the content, there are some fairly deep and complex analysis of this content to understand, well, what is this page talking about? What does it do? How accurate is this content? And it, Google does seek to compare your content with everyone else to work out, well, from what we know, does this look accurate, or is this a dubious source of knowledge, which is pretty important. Really what you need to be, I'm not going to go too much into the content. I don't want to talk about what Paul's going to dig into too heavily later, but if you've got no content or your content is poor, you don't have any relevancy to your subject, you have no value, you will unlikely be ranked in search. So that is incredibly important. So you need to ensure that you have clear, unambiguous content in a way that Google can see. And just a word on that, what can and can't Google see? Well, here's an example. When is content not content? I would say when it's an image. So this text on the left here, looks like that when Googlebot first sees it. Googlebot, the spiders that Google sends out, cannot see inside images, or Google search rankings do not at the moment take into account what's inside images as far as we know. They can read text far better, and Google's got some really intelligent stuff that can do it. But if you have important information for your users that you want to be given credit for within Google's ranking algorithm, do not put that content inside images. And the same does go for things like video, for podcasts, for all these other elements. Google's getting better at amassing all of that, but what we say is make sure it's in the written word too. Wouldn't be a talk about SEO without talking about keywords as well. And fundamentally, without going into the minutiae of each one, because the Moz guide that's in the further reading does a really good job, and you can cover it in your own pace. There are many elements of a website that we should have absolute control over, and we should use this space wisely to show Google, well, what are the keywords that we want to be found for? What are our customers searching for? And then what do we need to reflect back within that content? So that could be within the page's URL, could be within the title of the page, the description, the content itself. It could be within the alternate tags of images. It could be how the different pages link to each other. There are so many elements and facets that we need to be concerned with. And half of the problem that people have with this is not that you need to be some kind of wizard to get this magic formula right. It's that simply people aren't making use of the opportunities that are there. So look at all of the content elements on the page that you can change. Have you used your target key terms wisely? And by wisely, I don't mean repeating it over and over again. That's what we call spamming or being spammy. You don't want to do that. Google tends to take a dim view. If it reads well and it's focused on your target key terms, you're going in the right direction. The next point, I've mentioned content quite a lot. In terms of quantity, how much content do you need? Well, you have to rank against your competition. So you need to have more and better content than them. Now, there are quite a few sort of what we call correlation studies out there. So people go out, in this instance, this is a Can I Rank study, where they go, well, based on where websites are ranking for any given key terms, what is their content length? And then on average, what does that look like? So this particular graph is pretty much saying if you want to be on page 1, you need to have 1,000 words or more. Now, that is not a hard and fast rule, and there's a massive context here. And I just apply a health warning to this to say that a minimum or a maximum word count does not exist. It's all dependent on the context and the keywords that you want to rank for. But what's enough content to be the best result for a Google search? That's what you need to look at there. So actions from the technical side, well, make it easy for Google to find its way around your site. Ensure that you maintain keyword focus everywhere. Do not spam Google. Do not overcook it thinking that that might help you more. Believe me, it doesn't. But provide enough content to be the best answer in a way that Google can read and see. Let's move into some pitfalls. So many of these pitfalls kind of will help give some context to the pros to take into account. First things first, talking about broken pages and missing content. It's a really fundamental point, and it's about managing websites. It's not just about SEO, but if you have links on your website that go nowhere or go to the wrong place, or you have images that don't load correctly, or other various technical problems, these are all going to detriment your overall kind of SEO performance eventually. It's not necessarily to say that every 404 is a massive problem and you need to panic about it, but you need to be working to ensure that your website is complete. And as we said before, we're helping Googlebot, we're helping the spider find the content it needs to. We don't want it to spend its time trying to look for broken resources. The next part, and it's something a lot of people don't often take into account, is grammar and spelling mistakes. There are intentional errors on here, but what we need to do, Google does look at the quality of the content. It also looks at the things like the reading age and the reading difficulty to see if it's appropriate for its target audience. It's not just about making a good first impression to users, but it factors in with Google too. Another element, so this page here, this is kind of the perfect example of kind of content optimization and web page design gone wrong, I guess. This screenshot on the right, well, everyone sitting there watching this, I would be amazed if you could identify what kind of business that this website is actually representing. We've removed traces of the brand name because that may give it away. But actually, just to kind of skip ahead and spoil this, this is a business that provides Wi-Fi and connectivity solutions for entertainment businesses. There is nothing on this homepage that makes that explicit. Even when you look at the heading and the title, the snippet that appears within Google, apart from the brand mentions, which we've redacted there just for the sake of this, you cannot see what this web page is looking to achieve. So if we're struggling with this, how is Google going to give that business credit for what it's trying to do? And the simple answer is it probably won't. So we just need to ensure that when you look at the content on your website, can you understand what it actually is doing? But then moving on to this, from a technical perspective, as well as a content quality perspective, duplicated or thin content is really not cool. You need to make sure you've got value, you're not plagiarizing other people, and that it's providing the best view of your website, and that's really critical. So the pitfalls, the biggest pitfalls really are ensuring that your website is representative of the quality you want your business to be known for. It's very easy to forget about websites, particularly if the web and digital is not where you primarily get your business from. But every kind of element that a user may judge your website for, Google is looking to do the same. So elements that may not feel like SEO elements, that are just kind of site quality elements, will become SEO elements. So you just need to make sure that your site is quality. Then a word on considering mobile first. Now, the year is 2020, obviously, and mobile as a device, as a technology is far greater than it ever used to be. But globally, mobile is now the primary device. So when we group desktop and tablet together, compare it with mobile is 52% of device usage. That's big. And for many businesses, this switch over when mobile became the primary device happened years ago, potentially. And actually, ironically, in the last couple of months, desktop use has accelerated in the UK, which we suspect is because of lockdown in some sort of situations. But you can't ignore mobile. Google assesses your website based on the mobile experience, not the desktop one. Now that's a problem, because how do we typically build and optimize our websites? Well, we do it on something that looks like this, a laptop or a desktop. We build the websites for the desktop experience, but in my experience, we seldom review them for the mobile, which is missing a trick, especially, as I mentioned, Google is assessing your performance within search on its mobile counterpart. Now, how can we get around this? Well, first thing is actually just check, is your web page mobile friendly? Google's test here, mobile friendly, put the page in, return the results. It will tell you where your device is going to be causing issues. Now, the other elements to kind of see here is, do you remove content on your website for the mobile version? Do you feel like, oh, we don't need as much content, we're going to hide it? Hiding content from Google on mobile will impact your rankings on mobile and desktop. So again, this experience needs to be thought of, what's the best for the mobile experience first. But also, we really need to work out, what is the lead device for your own website? One of these examples here came from a client of ours. Nearly 80% of traffic is mobile based. If we're not obsessing over the quality of the mobile version of the website, we're already missing out. And if you don't have analytics and cannot check this yourself, this is actually the more fundamental step. Get it set up as soon as possible. So the real action here, and again, is something that is so easily missed, is just be obsessed about the performance of your website on mobile, by the content that's served, by the site structure, its ease of navigation, its speed, how accessible it is. The experience on mobile is the one you need to be most worried about. So some free tools, we're getting to the end of this. So there are a number of free tools, there are a number of paid tools. We could be going on for a long kind of time. What I want to set you up with some elements that you can go and use today and begin to learn more about your website if you haven't done these already. So the first is Google PageSpeed Insights. PageSpeed is a ranking factor. So the faster your website is, that will be replicated within your rankings. It's not to say that having a fast website is enough. There are hundreds of ranking factors that we all need to be taking account of. But if you are slower than your competition, especially if you're slower than your competition on the mobile version of the website, that will be harming you. So go to Google's PageSpeed Insights tool, check your website, check your competitor's website. Not only will you see how you perform against them, but you'll be able to start building a list of how you can improve that. Now, this is so important. They're so easy to find out where you could do better, but you will be likely to need to seek technical assistance on a number of these issues because they can be challenging. So web developers will be a kind of a key asset here. Just to say though, is when you're uploading images to a website, make sure the images aren't massive, high resolution. Any images over 1 megabyte, for example, are far too large. They can be compressed and shrunk down without any real technical knowledge. So image compression, tiny PNG is a service that is free and accessible. Use things like that to make sure your images are the size they need to be. Now, we've already talked about the mobile friendly test. This is kind of mission critical, but you have to ensure the users get the best experience from your mobile website. No question, that should be your chief concern. So next is Google Search Console. This is something that's so underutilized with businesses, especially with kind of new digital presences. But this is basically your direct line from Google as to how Google treats your website in terms of what works well and what doesn't work well. And you use this to understand the issues that Google is having with your website. And this covers the more technical issues in nature. And then from there, you can build a plan in addressing those. But I don't know if you can see the graph on this that shows you the performance. You can actually dig into and find out, well, what kinds of search terms are people finding me for? On average, where do I rank within search for this? And this is a free resource from Google. Bing offers something similar, so does Yandex, which is more of a Russian kind of based search engine, but this information is free and accessible if you reach out and grab it. And then finally, I've mentioned it once before, Google Analytics. Google Analytics is not an exclusive SEO tool. I'd say that actually, if you don't have a good handle on your analytics data, you're going to struggle with whatever you do marketing wise. But establish whether your website is achieving its goals on mobile, on desktop, in the locations that you need it to be, and make sure your goals and conversions are set up correctly there. Again, it's free and it's relatively easy to do. But the key action, the key takeaway from these free tools is we really need to build up this understanding of our websites like Google does. And then from there, we need to work out how can we then improve this experience. So quick recap, the kind of key takeaways here, as you will, for getting started on the technical SEO side of things is fundamental thing is ensuring that we can clearly demonstrate the value that our websites provide to users. And we also then need to worry about the technical side of, well, how does Google find its way around your website? Do we maintain the keyword focus without spamming? Do we provide enough content to be the best answer? And can Google read and see this all? Then we need to ensure that, that our websites represent the quality we want the businesses to be known for, so we can receive the ranking benefit for that. And then we need to be obsessed about the mobile version of the website and how it performs relative to desktop. Then spend this time understanding your website like Google does, and then improving your experience from there. So that's me. That's kind of where we are. Next up, as I said, we're going into content. Content is a huge part of the overall experience. So I will now back off to Paul and Tim. Hi, Tim. Tim's back.
Hi, I'm back. Yes. Well, thanks everyone for bearing with me and the technical issue that I had this morning. Ironically, during the technology part of the webinar. Anyway, I am back on mobile. As I say, never underestimate the importance of mobile with SEO. So thank you very much, Chris, for that sort of technology overview. And I think one of the important messages here is that so much of this is stuff that you can be doing yourself. It's practical takeaways, hopefully, that you can take into your tourism business now and start making those changes, as it were. Understanding your website as Google will look at it and understand it is a really key message. So thank you very much, Chris. So it's my pleasure now to introduce properly. I wasn't able to introduce Chris properly, but to introduce Paul Edwards from This Way. We were very keen to have two experts on today representing different SEO specialist agencies. And it's very important, I think, that if you're out there looking at the agency market and looking at who can support you with what you're trying to do, that you do your shopping around. We've obviously brought, we hope, two really great speakers here today, and I'm now going to hand over to Paul. Please do note, though, that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A or just use the chat if you want to do some informal networking. So over to you, Paul.
Great, thank you. Let's get this rolling. So, as Chris mentioned, really, content does form a really important part of that that process. And over the next sort of 15 minutes, really, I just want to look at how you can approach content for your business ahead of any kind of keyword research, anything like that, but introduce you to what you need to be thinking about and talking to your internal teams, or even yourself if you're a sole owner of your business. Introduce some frameworks for how we can actually start to plan out our content, as well as thinking about the importance of competitor analysis as well. And Chris touched on that in his tech presentation there. And I'm going to guess many of us on this on this webinar have heard the phrase "content is king." Yeah, it is massively important. I think let's So that's jargon phrase number one. And it is, but knowing what content to produce can be difficult. But hopefully over the next few slides, we'll give some understanding around, as I say, some of those processes and tools that can really help you start that journey, even before you talk to anybody like myself and Chris at an agency or anything like that. In terms of where do you start? Well, there's a lot of important questions that you need to ask yourself first. A lot of people make the mistake of just jumping headfirst into keyword research and, well, my business is this and we just need to write some content about this. There's a lot of questions that you need to ask to sort of really set that layer. And again, if you've got an internal team, these are all things really that you'd be talking to your internal team about as well. And one of the most obvious ones really is, well, what are my actual business objectives? Too often, if we talk to a new client or even just networking or anything like that, SEO objectives and business objectives are often not aligned and together because before venturing into any of that, it should align. If you're a hotel that has a restaurant or you are just a restaurant, well, are you looking to increase lunchtime trade? Maybe you're looking to increase bookings in the shoulder months. Keyword research, content creation, and SEO in general, it takes a lot of time. And this, to come back to Chris's point about Google and what they look to achieve and how they make money. Well, that's one of the great things about paid search. You can have a paid campaign live in 30 minutes. SEO takes time. And it's really important that your time, your resource, and your efforts are focused in the right areas of the business to make it effective. And again, this sounds like it should be obvious, but who are my customers? What would they search for? Again, to bring this back to travel, tourism and hospitality, well, is your audience local? Is your audience national? If you're a local restaurant, well, you might want to be focusing on your local presence online. And I believe one of the stats that it was coming up about the rise in people searching for things like restaurants near me and that side of things. These are really important questions to ask for it. And one of the examples we like to give is, when you're sort of thinking about content and what kind of content you should be producing is, well, why would an 18-year-old single mum from Cornwall respond to the same content as a 35-year-old father of three working in central London? Two very different things there and how they would react to that content. So it's really, really important before you even think about any of that content side of things, understanding who my customers actually are and what are they going to be looking for. And a really key framework is a framework called See, Think, Do, Care. And again, there's lots of further reading and links within this deck, which we'll share with you. And I think the fundamental thing here is that digital is, especially if we think the elephant in the room, of course, of COVID-19, it dominates the way that we as customers interact with brands. And the idea of See, Think, Do, Care is it provides a modern, non-linear framework for helping you as a business understand how you can optimize across that entire digital journey. So again, we think about SEO and we think keywords and content and how do I optimize for this? We need to, again, think about where does that sit in the customer journey? What parts of the customer journey you might be quite good at. You're actually missing a lot of content in another part of the customer journey. This allows you to start thinking about that. And brands often mix one marketing message across that whole spectrum there. And what that means is you miss, key opportunities to capitalize on what your customer's actually needing at that point in the journey. So to bring this back again, if I'm a hotel in Aldeburgh in Suffolk, well, yes, there's going to be people searching for hotels in Aldeburgh and things like that. But what about things like things to do in Aldeburgh? What's the best time of year to go to Aldeburgh? Is it okay to go to Aldeburgh in the autumn? That all sits in that thinking stage, and a lot of hotels ignore that sort of content. But it's important. you know, think about itineraries that you could make for people and things like that. So again, putting customer first, understanding each of those consideration stages is, you know, a real kind of key to the success of this framework. And fundamentally, again, what it allows you to do is really start to map your content across those different areas. And alongside a framework like See, Think, Do, Care is this idea of micro moments. Now, micro moments isn't new. It's been around. Both of these are Google methodologies, and this is the idea that smartphones and mobiles really changed again the way that we research and make decisions, and these are intent-driven moments of decision-making really that occur again across that entire customer journey. And there was Google research that 69% of leisure travelers search for travel ideas during their spare moments. And if you think about that, again, it's spare moments of when I've got the time. Again, if you think of a family with a couple of children and when they actually get a moment to breathe and think about these things. And 91% of smartphone users look up information while they're in the middle of a task. So, you know, that could be anything from, blimey, I need to change the tire on the car and I've got no idea how to change the tire on my car. What do I do? That's an I want to know moment there. But it's crucial that you understand what your micro moments are and then, again, map that back to that See, Think, Do, Care framework. And you might think, as a tourism hospitality, well, I don't really have micro moments because if I want to go on a holiday, well, that's a fairly planned thing. Not really. Again, it's the idea of just that, again, if you think of COVID-19 and everything else, I need to get away. I want to get away. Again, where do I want to go? I've got no idea where I want to go. I just want to get away. And again, thinking of the content that sits within those different elements. And again, a lot of brands that we work with forget about the travelers that are actually there. They've made their decision. They've come to Albury and Suffolk, and then they're looking for a restaurant. So again, catching these people that are actually there as much as people who are necessarily thinking about their holiday and where they want to go, you know, is really important. So again, lots more further reading on this. I really encourage you to look and understand both of those systems because they really, really will help you properly understand what content you actually need to be creating for your customers. And again, in terms of tapping into those different areas, again, to pull us back to Chris's presentation around being quick, again, thinking about, is my site quick? And this is where having a really strong technical foundation of your website really is important to actually maximize your efforts for content. You could put a whole load of effort into creating fantastic content. If it doesn't load quickly or Google can't crawl it properly, well, A, no one might ever find it, and B, people might not wait around to see it. So again, it's just a little bit of reading in there around being useful, being quick. And what this also helps you to see as well is SEO as part of the bigger digital jigsaw. And I know the guys are, again, these further sort of deep dives that will happen over the next few months, you know, thinking about how SEO really sits in your wider digital strategy too. You know, are you there? Well, if you're not there, do you need social and paid search to be there and actually be visible in the first instance, for example? So lots of further reading on that, but I really encourage you to have a look at that. And then another conversation that we often have is around the importance of topics. So again, before you get into keywords and things like that, understanding that keywords are really important, but to really, and this is on Chris's charts earlier, to really rank well across the piece, it's really important that you're an authority on your topic. And we'll come on to the long tail, which is another jargon word, which will debunk that. So this might look like a really random example, and this is a shout out to a chap called Marcus Tober, who runs a company called Search Metrics, which is a tool for sort of tracking your visibility online. And he did a fantastic talk at Brighton SEO, which is a big SEO conference, usually held twice yearly, obviously not this year, where he tried to get this across. And Indian cuisine might sound like a really strange thing, but it does really help illustrate what this means. So what do I mean we're talking about, well, topics over keywords? Well, if you were a website and you talked about Indian cuisine, you might optimize for things like spices and Indian restaurant and Indian ingredients and curries and all that sort of thing, which is great. And you would get some visibility on that, no doubt. But if you actually think of the topic and all the things that come within those things, it really quickly starts to expand. I mean, crikey, think about Indian curry and all of the different types of curry and the different regions in India where you can get the different nuances of curry. It would go on and on and on, and recipes is the same thing. So again, bring that back to tourism, and I keep using Aldeburgh as an example because I really like Aldeburgh. Again, if Aldeburgh is your topic, make yourself and think about the content you can create that makes you an authority on Aldeburgh. So that when you are optimizing for keywords like hotels in Aldeburgh, best hotels in Aldeburgh, for example, you're giving Google will see that you are authoritative in that space for Aldeburgh, just as an example there. And again, Chris mentioned about those guidelines that Google have produced, and within those guidelines, they're very, very clear on expertise, authority, and trust. 3 really, really key things there, and that applies to anybody. That doesn't matter. You know, yes, there's hyper-competitive niches like finance and medical websites, but it still applies to travel and tourism too. You know, really, really important. So thinking about, okay, cool. How can I make this content, you know, more of a content hub perhaps that covers a little bit more about this than maybe just a page about a particular thing. Really, really important. And again, when you come to look at your keyword research and looking, oh, what keywords should I be optimizing for? A lot of people turn their noses up at these sort of smaller volume keywords. Never undervalue the importance of those smaller keywords. So Chris has mentioned that the Moz guide, which we're linking to as part of both of our decks here, and this is taken straight from that guide. And it shows you that roughly 70% of keywords and traffic is what we call long tail. What they mean by long tail really is anything outside of those really big kind of top head terms. So shoes, jeans. Then think, okay, well, I'm searching for jeans. Well, I want some blue jeans. Still in the sort of head state there. Well, actually, I want some blue Levi's jeans. We're getting into the chunky middle. Well, actually, I want 30 waist, 30 leg blue Levi's jeans. Then you're starting to get to the long tail. And what does that mean? Well, you're far more likely to convert when you're in that long tail. So if you're, I've seen from a lot of the polls here, if you've not even started out in SEO yet, actually focusing on that long tail, it can be really, really valuable. They convert better, often greater opportunity to actually start ranking for those terms. You've got big, big head terms that are dominated by the likes of Booking.com, who we all love, and TripAdvisors and the like. Again, and you think of that tourism space, you know, it's really important that you look at that long tail and what are your individual long tail searches that match your business. Once you've got that understanding, at that point, you can really start to think about and start your keyword research. And again, tools at the end for how you can start to do that. Once you know, cool, these are my objectives. This is what my customer wants and is looking for. Here's some other ideas around the kind of topics I need to cover. At that point, you can do your keyword research and start to plan out and group things by topic and focus on that See, Think, Do, Care system. And finally, just quickly as well about competitor analysis. Now, analyzing your competitors is a really important role during your content creation phase. Not to copy them, but often your competitors online will be different from your competitors who you think your competitors might be. But identifying pages and brands that rank highly for your target keywords, it's then looking at what quality those pages possess. It will allow you to create content that's better than them. You know, and it could be as simple as a survey that was done in 2015 that was talking about travelers who were looking to travel to the north of England and what they were looking for, hypothetically. But you might come along and go, no, I'm going to update that survey. Update that survey, fresh content, you get some links to it from journalists and various other things, and voila, you're starting to take it further. So look at what content is being used, Get those clues from Google, because there's a reason Google is ranking them there. You know, what topics are they covering that might give you a clue to what topics you should be covering? What formats of content are they using? Have they got video? Have they got infographics? You know, is it, like Chris said earlier, the big sort of graph he had around word length? Well, again, that is very specific to each keyword. Well, is it a big page length? Does it tell you that the user intent behind there is actually that, yeah, it's a big informational term, and users are looking for that. And this is a premise that we call 10x. And again, Moz does a really, really good, in the guide, does a really, really good job of talking about 10x. It's this premise of 10 times better than your competitors. If you want to outrank that competitor and get on page one, get even into position one, be 10 times better. Give search engines a reason to put you on top. And a key takeaway, and I mentioned this right at the beginning, we said, what is SEO? Always keep your focus on the user. Always. You can run around and chase algorithms and, you know, all these sorts of things, but keep your focus on the user. If you please the user, give them a great content, give them great experience, Google and other search engines are going to reward you for that. Again, if you're a local company and you need to focus on local SEO, well, make sure you're set up, again, for the local market. Make sure your content is localized for the user. So your blog, talk about the local area. Google My Business, make sure your Google My Business is set up for the local area, and all these sorts of things start to come together. But never lose your focus on the user. Yes, keyword volumes and all these sorts of things are really, really important. But if it's not good for the user, really is no point. And so just to wrap this up, remembering that this is a piece of the bigger jigsaw, you know, and to maximize your content efforts, as I say, it's really important you think about those technical elements. And likewise, if you're in a competitive sector, understanding that there are other areas such as link building, for example, which again, I believe there will be another deep dive about that might be important to you. And there broadly is a sort of on-site optimization, that text, the stuff that Chris has covered there. But just remembering as well that SEO is a big thing. But if you focus on those first two segments there, you will go a long way. You really will give yourself a really good platform for success there. So in the same way, tools and resources to get you started. So again, you'll have access to all of these links. So Moz's guide to keyword research, a lot of things that I've mentioned in the deck here are covered in there. Moz has also got a keyword explorer, which is free. I should stress there is, obviously the most famous one is Google's own keyword planner, but you do have to set up a Google account to do that. Just be mindful of that. Used to be you could just access that for free. And there's a couple of other little things in here as well, just to get the juices going. So Google Trends is a fantastic tool for if you wanted to measure potentially the way that, see the trends over time of how people are searching for things, again, in different regions and all that sort of things. Again, it's all free, it's brilliant. Answer the Public as well is a really useful tool for seeing what questions people are asking, which allows you to then optimize for those. And again, Micro Moments and See Think Do Care, we've got in there as well to give you some of that further reading and give yourself a little bit of base understanding. And I really stress, don't be overwhelmed. It's very accessible and will really give you a much better platform for looking and talking about your content. And then that's it from me. So.
Thank you so much, Paul. Fantastic. Yeah, I think some really sort of wise words there around, keeping the focus very much on the customer. I think we've got we've got some great takeaways there as well, and further reading, which is all good stuff. And again, the message is very much about, hopefully you all feel empowered to go away and do some things, thinking about that long tail and thinking about, who really is your customer. So thank you very much to Paul. Now, if Chris would like to come back onto the screen, I can't actually see from this phone whether we're all live.
I'm here.
Great, hi. So we have got a little bit of time left just for a bit of Q&A and discussion. We've had a great question from George come up in the Q&A, but I think just to kick it off, I mean, I suppose if I'm putting myself in the shoes of one of the tourism businesses on this webinar, really looking, what to do next, and if they're thinking about engaging perhaps with a professional agency like yourselves, I mean, what's your sort of top tips if you're shopping around, what to look out from an agency, or perhaps warning signs of what might not be a good fit for your business? Chris, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I think, and the key one really is when you're talking to agencies, look for someone who's willing to challenge your expectations. And I don't necessarily mean that in an overly combative sense, but sometimes it's hard to know what exactly you're looking for or what to expect. You will have your own expectations, and the agencies will ask you for that. But if they say, yes, we can do exactly what you want in the time frame you want for the budget that you're specifying, if they come out and it's that easy, it's probably too good to be true. Because timeframes, budgets, expectations, they won't all magically align straight away. That's not to say that you can't work to it, but a good agency will challenge you on that. And in the right way, in the positive way, and they will get you thinking, and hopefully, even if it's just that initial sales conversation, you'll go away from that conversation knowing more and being more confident than before you started it. And if that's the case, then that's definitely a good sign.
And Paul, what's your take on that?
Yeah, similar to what I sort of said in the deck, really. If you went to an agency, they should be asking you a lot of those questions I outlined at the beginning. Well, what are your objectives? And really, to take on Chris's point there, it might be you need to take a few steps back. I need content. Okay, well, great, but actually your tech's not good, and we'll take it. So not just taking on the brief and going, oh yeah, cool, sure, we can do that, and here's a retainer, and off we go. It's making sure that the agency is asking you those questions, really wants to get in and understand your business, because you can't do successful SEO if you don't have that understanding of the business. It's really, I know both Chris's agencies and the one I work for, it's more about being an extension of your own business and your team, rather than a third outsourced part of the team, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that, you should really get that vibe from an agency. And if you're not, then yeah, you need to just sort of feel, well, are they really understanding what we need to achieve here? And if anyone ever says to you, sure, I'll get you on position 1 or page 1, instant red flag. You just cannot guarantee that. Have a really good idea, yeah, sure, but if anyone is guaranteeing that in 2020, then again, that is just big red flag.
Yeah, so watch out for being over-promised too. Okay.
Yes,
because of the technical glitch at the beginning of this, we're just going to run this webinar on for another sort of 5-10 minutes for people who can stay on the line, because we have got some other questions. If you can stay on, please do. If not, thank you very much for being with us for this hour, and we'll look forward to kind of bringing you hopefully back for another deep dive in over the sort of autumn period. So the question from George was very much around sort of role of social in terms of SEO, and the kind of perhaps rebalancing between Google and social platforms. I mean, guys, what's your view in terms of where sort of social is now sitting within this whole question?
This is a biggie, and there's two ways that you can kind of approach this. There's the kind of the simplistic one, which is, does social help with SEO? And for me, the really short answer there is it depends. And that's that. I'll leave it there for the moment, because I think probably the more interesting part, and I think this is what George is maybe getting at, is, does it have to be SEO, or where does social play? Is search becoming second to social, or are the experiences? Yeah. And I think actually that's the answer is kind of yes. And I've worked with a lot of businesses who are very, very successful, and none of it comes from Google, because they've found their audience and they've found a way of communicating with that audience. And that is effectively the digital marketing mix. Well, any marketing mix really is, where are the people that want to buy my stuff, and how can I speak to them effectively? So SEO is one of those. And you can find a niche using social media that might take you years of budget and SEO to kind of build into. So I think there is a real kind of balancing act. I think as Facebook in particular have really grown and hoovered up most of the competition, they've become a very significant player, and Google cannot crack Facebook.
Yeah.
if you're sharing content and you're on the Facebook platform, Google can't really intercept you. But Facebook's found a way of intercepting and understanding you when you're not on the platform, and Facebook's own tracking and its own pixel is helping it build that picture. So I think over the next couple of years, the social media marketing angle will be as important, if not potentially more so in some ways, if you can identify the audience. So but search is getting bigger, and it's still getting bigger. Voice devices, smart devices, voice assistants, these are all extensions of search. They might not be the 10 results that we're used to, but you're asking your phone questions, you're talking to your TV, you're asking the speaker things, there are lots of other things, and this is still underpinned by SEO. But equally Amazon, you need Amazon optimization, which is a form of SEO if you want to rank well on Amazon, which if you're selling something, you probably want to be on Amazon. So I think the picture has just become a lot more fragmented, and you can't ignore any of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for that. I'm keen to kind of move on to a sort of second question, which is really coming back to Paul's talk and Paul's discussion of the term long tail. There was just a question from Lizzie about kind of really what does that mean, where, and how does it fit in terms of keywords and content? I mean, I think what I was hearing from Paul was that, there are some big, very popular terms which are the sort of the top of the tail, the short bit of the tail. And then there are lots and lots of more niche terms as you go further down. But I think the key thing I heard was about conversion, and how conversion is actually more successful with some of these more specific terms. Is that fair, Paul?
Yeah, and again, this will, just like Chris's point when Sarah referenced where we were looking at word counts and things like that, your long tail will be specific to your business. And when you're looking at your keyword research, it's more that if you will plug your sort of main keyword that you feel is your keyword into a keyword explorer or a Google keyword planner, and it will go, wow, here's a whacking great big term, which is great. So, and I kept referencing Aldborough, but that might be Hotels Aldborough as an example. But again, it's thinking of long tail terms tend to be sort of 3/4+ keywords in a query. So if you think about, and again, this is a lot of people in mine and Chris's sector, SEO world, actually sometimes talk about key phrases, because actually if you think about keywords, it's actually the query that people search. There's keywords that make up a query basically. And long tail is that idea that it's maybe 3, 4, 5, could be even 7, 8, 9, 10, keywords long that makes up this big query. But what you tend to find is that they've gone further down the funnel. People who are looking at longer tail, they're further down the journey at the point of conversion, and they then start to convert better. So sort of use that jeans example. If I'm just looking for, just want some jeans, that's your big fat head, one word query. But once you start to get down and you realize what jeans you want and what size you need, and you tend to convert a bit better. So it's when you'll soon see your long tail when you start to do that keyword research. Because for an example, if your head terms 1,000 searches a month, and there's a smattering of terms that are like, I don't know, 100, some people might forget about those and just really focus on that big one. But actually those hundreds are really important and convert better as well. So it's really, really important.
Thanks. I mean, that was that. Well, that seemed clear to me, and Lizzie's commented that was helpful. So that's great. Look, I mean, I think my big sort of takeaway from this morning is that a lot of what's called SEO and might be perhaps perceived as quite, in some cases a dark art, is actually a sort of natural extension of sort of understanding your business and your market, understanding your customer, and sort of doing all the things doing anyway, but just kind of bringing that into your digital presence. And it's as much about spending the time as it is spending a lot of money.
Yeah, and I think there's a chap called John Mueller who's sort of Chris again mentioned about the sort of the manual teams that they have there at Google, and he's your head of web spam at Google, and he's there to really try and keep us SEOs on the straight and narrow and focusing on the right things. And if you look at everything that he says and everything that comes out of Google, it's Stop worrying about it. Just focus on your customer, focus on your user, focus on creating great content for your user, and you'll tend to do well. And really, as I say, that is just that big takeaway for me is, you know, so when you're thinking, oh, SEO, God, I don't know what that is, you probably do. You know, the people on this chat, the panel, I'm sure you know your business better than anybody. And that's your starting point. And yes, tech is, you know, really important. And then what content you create is really important. Make sure it's natural. You know, don't worry about, you know, thinking that you necessarily need to be creating something that you just can't create. You know, it's really is something that is, yes, it's a dark art. No, it's not actually. It's just something that's really, it is accessible.
I think there is an associate health warning there on the dark art side is, if any of you are curious and want to search more about it, and some of you may do and probably will, as everyone does at one stage in their lives, even if you stumble upon something by accident, the darker side of SEO, the side that predominantly was 10 years ago common practice and the done thing. The reason why we don't cover this, and we haven't covered it today specifically, is even in some circumstances it can sometimes work. It more likely will damage brands and anyone looking to build a presence with longevity and can sustain. So, and you know, I've experimented and run tests on kind of my own sites and things because I wanted to learn more. Be very, very, very careful if you go down those avenues. You know, do not experiment or do anything that seems sort of black hat or dark arts with your brands. Anything that you want to be ranking in Google for the long term, it's not worth it. And I can just say that with the benefit of experience. So, you know, by all means, have a look. If you want to drop me an email, I'm more than happy to talk about it, but it's not business practice as far as I'm concerned anyway. And it's certainly not what our agency would ever suggest. And I'm assuming same with Paul as well.
Well, thank you. I mean, thank you both, Chris and Paul, for being very generous with your time this morning. We have gone slightly over, but hopefully it's allowed for a bit more discussion. Really, I think a lot of, you know, fantastic practical advice there, hopefully stuff you can take away. We'll be sharing all the links and slides and so on after. So if you've been on this webinar, thank you very much for joining. Thanks for interacting with us. And thank you also for bearing with some technical issues up front. So that's much appreciated. Well, that just about wraps it up for the Tourism and Tech deep dive into SEO. I think we've talked about quite a lot more than SEO actually over the course of the morning. And I think that message that this is one part of your kind of marketing activity mix, don't ignore the others. But we will be back with more deep dives coming up after the end of the after the school summer holidays. We'll be scheduling some more, so do watch out for those in your inbox. And meanwhile, I'd just like to thank Chris and Paul for fantastic presentations. I hope you've all found it informative, and I hope you all have a great Friday and a great rest of the weekend. So thank you all.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you all. Cheers.
Okay, all the best.